When I say the words Twilight Princess or Skyward Sword, what's the first thing that pops to mind? If the answer is nothing much or no strong opinions, you would be in the majority. And for a podcast that runs off of recollections, there aren't many to go around regarding Zelda games from the aughts not called Majora's Mask. I mean, to be fair, maybe I searched in the wrong place. People my age played these games, but not too many have really strong memories or stories. When the millennium turned over, I was in college, working part-time and avoiding class by going into the radio station. Games were on the back burner for me in that era, and I think for many of my Nintendo friends, they likely were in the same boat. You see, to me, the story of Twilight to Skyward is a tale of two overcorrections. Twilight was the gritty, grim Zelda game that fans craved, but it lacked the charm, life, and most importantly, for me anyway, true exploration. And Skyward swung the pendulum back toward Wind Waker territory, only to be stymied by waggle controls on a dying console. On this episode of A Gamer Looks at 40, we mine people's memories of both games to see if we can separate reality from perception during this strange time in Zelda's history. Time to grab our sword, brandish our shield, and hope to heaven our dog doesn't walk in front of the TV so the Wiimote stays connected as we discuss Twilight and Skyward, a tale of two titles. Zelda in the early aughts was a roller coaster, at least from my perspective. The year 2000's Majora's Mask was not the sequel to Ocarina fans expected, 2002's Wind Waker was the game nobody wanted, and hardly anybody bought the unique Four Swords Adventures in 2004 because nobody was buying GameCube games in 2004. The Cube's best-selling game that year was Mario Party 6. I mean, I didn't even realize it existed until a patron kindly told me about it. In the first half of the decade, 4 handheld games were released to the wild. One was a Pokemon-esque double release for a handheld console on its last legs, the third a port of Link to the Past with multiplayer mechanics, and Minish Cap in early 2005. Now, despite a weird January release when kids were still playing their Christmas presents, Minish became the 7th best-selling Game Boy Advance game of that year, and it was pretty well reviewed. Problem was, there wasn't much buzz. And as we've discovered over the course of this series, history has been more than kind to these now classics, but in the mid-2000s, console Zelda games fell out of touch, and handheld games were niche. And then this happened at E3 2004.
Thank you, Mr. Iwata. I hope you all enjoyed our program this morning. But before you leave, I'd like you to step inside one more world for Nintendo GameCube.
Link riding in Twilight on Epona, horseback combat, realistic graphics, and probably most importantly, an edgy teenage Link. When Shigeru Miyamoto emerged from backstage wielding the Master Sword in the same pose as our beloved hero on screen, the crowd erupted. He then had this to say.
Even after 18 years, the Legend of Zelda never stops changing. And this game is not different. We are now taking you to a world where Link has grown up. A world where he will act different and look different. In order to grow, Link must not stand still. And neither can I. So, thank you.
In order to move, you must not stand still. and neither can I. The moment the most important figure, arguably in the history of video games, said those words, we all forgot about Four Swords and Minish Cap. It was all about this brand new adventure, and it didn't even have a name yet. Twilight Princess was released during holiday of 2006 on the GameCube, and then a few weeks later on the Wii. And it was a smashing success, both critically and commercially. During its release week, Twilight was purchased with 3 out of every 4 Wii consoles. And it wasn't a pack-in. People were buying the Wii because the newest Zelda was available for it. It became the 6th best-selling game of 2006, despite only being available for about a month. It rode the Wii craze wave and became a system-selling title. Until Breath of the Wild arrived on Switch in 2017, no other modern Zelda game sold more copies. The Legend of Zelda was back in the public eye. To talk about these triumphant times of Twilight Princess, Jodi, aka Backwheel on Twitter, Ian, aka TeacherBloke85, also on Twitter, and then Games with Coffee all joined me to talk about their first impressions. So you moved on from Wind Waker to Twilight.
Yes. Yeah.
You moved on from bright and cheery and fun and joyful to dark and depressing and
Darkest
sad.
Zelda game I've ever played, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think it might be the darkest, other than Majora.
Other than Majora's Mask, which I've never played.
Right.
But yeah, Twilight Princess, that's the first one I played with my wife. She's not a gamer, but she does like watching some of my games, and she liked watching that one.
Cool.
So yeah, I didn't get that one until years later on my Wii when I got married. I only played that one about 10 years ago.
Oh, okay. That's fair. What about that? Because my wife is not a gamer per se as well. Yeah. However, there are certain games we do like to play together. One of them's Portal. We're big Portal fans. She loves Portal. A couple others in there, retro games like Mario World, Yoshi's Island, stuff she grew up with playing. So, we dig that. What about Twilight Princess kind of connected you together? It's like, oh, this is something we can enjoy together.
So the only other games I've managed to get my wife in place with me is KOTOR and Dragon Age. So okay. RPGs that she can, and she picks the dialogue then when we're playing with it, right?
Oh, cool.
But she likes seeing it. She can do something else too. And that's what she found with Link. Like when I'm doing the little parts, like going around, she can just do whatever she wants on the computer. But then when we get to a boss or something like that, she's interested. Like it's enough to catch her attention, and it has the little story bits. That's the part she likes. Especially with Twilight releasing those luminaries, I think they're called, the big guys.
Yes, that's right. Yep.
Yes, and she liked Midna, which I don't. Midna annoys me, but she liked Midna.
Hey, listen, it is what it is.
Yeah,
Midna,
she's such a little brat.
Really is really rather obnoxious, but if she has fans, she has fans. Yep. So Twilight Princess, obviously a big departure. How did you feel at the time? Well, again, it sounds like just like about 10 years ago, so maybe a little removed.
There was a little removed. I actually I bought it when I got my Wii, and I wasn't such a fan of it at first. It looked dark. When I first got turned to a wolf, I'm like, oh wow, this is so limiting. I actually got stuck in that prison cell. Mm-hmm. Where you first turn to the wolf, because I had to look up how to get out of the cell. It was so annoying.
Yeah.
But once I got into it, it actually has a really interesting story, and it drew me more in. It has more lore, like I said, and that's the one that sort of really got me into lore. And that I bought Hyrule Historia right after buying that game.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Because I tried to figure out how the luminaries hooked into the other games, because I had played Wind Waker had this history it gives at the beginning, how it ties to the other games, and I played the second game. And then to come to this one, I'm like, oh, I must have missed something. Turns out I didn't miss anything. It's just each of these games is separate, but it felt like I was missing something.
Sure, yeah, because it's so different, right? It's so very, very different than what had come before it. How did you... I'm glad you brought up the wolf and transforming into the creature, and how it is very limiting. And I never loved running around as the wolf.
No, I liked it at first, and some of it was neat, but the wolf areas always seem to drag on a little too long.
now we're kind of moving through the chronology. We come across the GameCube and Twilight Princess. What's your take on Twilight Princess?
It's
and what was your?
game.
Did you own it at the time, or anything like that?
I played it on the Wii.
Okay.
And the flipped version, as I understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah, loved it. Absolutely fantastic game. I have got a GameCube copy now that I recently came into possession of, and again, it'll be quite interesting to see the game as it was meant to be, the right way round, as opposed to flipped for the Wii.
Yeah, I remember playing it as it came out, and I remember liking it, but not loving it. And I think I am due a replay of it. For sure.
Yeah, I mean, I said the same about Wind Waker at the time. That's a game that came out of nowhere for me.
So I do want to camp out on Twilight a little bit. Obviously, the big mechanic is turning into the wolf, right?
So cool.
And having that. I think it's cool in theory. I never loved the actual implementation, though. What was your take on that? First off, your first impressions of Twilight, of course.
Yeah.
And then, what did you think about that kind of mechanic?
Yep, love Twilight Princess as a game. I think it's the departure that was needed from Wind Waker. Wind Waker bringing all the cartoony, cel-shaded kind of things, even though that was quite a dark game in terms of the plot when you actually get into what's actually happened to Hyrule and such. But then to actually go to a game that is, a lot darker and muted in colour. And, of course, you've got a wolf, which is always really cool, really badass kind of thing. It was what the series needed to bring back that certain kind of audience that were turned off by what Wind Waker looked like. Again, those first impressions mean a lot. And Wind Waker, you had to play it to understand it, I think. And I think Twilight Princess was the same. You kind of have to play it and dig through that, and you think, oh, there's a Zelda game under here. It's not just trying to be Shadow the Hedgehog.
Right, yeah. And I think you did have to mine through that a bit because, again, it is very dark and edgy. And
Yeah.
I honestly always thought Twilight was a direct response to Wind Waker.
Yeah.
I do think Twilight Princess was the answer. Like, all right, fine. You want dark, edgy, brooding, pretty darn sad Legend of Zelda? Here you go.
You want Dark Zelda, you got Dark Zelda.
Fine, here you go.
You've got your light world, you've got your dark world. There you go. Take your pick.
That's it. Here you go, gamers. Enjoy yourself. Stop complaining. Moving forward, though, to those post-Wind Waker games, Twilight and Skyward in particular. Now, the episode I'm going to do is going to be a combo, Twilight and Skyward.
Oh, yeah.
Reason being is that I feel like they almost are companion pieces because I find it very interesting how one, I feel, was an overcorrection, and then the other was a vast overcorrection the other way. So Wind Waker comes out, people are upset. Oh, I want Adult Link. Nintendo says, fine. Here's Adult Link in a super dark game, and you turn into a wolf, and everything is just, seeped in grime almost, to a certain extent. Not really, but really, at the outset feels like that.
Yeah.
So that's like the
great.
overcorrection to Twilight. And then it's like, well, Skyward, let's put it right back into the sunshine. Literally, we're just going to fly around in the sky. So going from, it's just this wiper blade, it feels like, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh.
Almost like
How
a
do you
pendulum swing.
Almost like a pendulum swing. How do you feel about Twilight and Skyward as kind of those two bridge games between your Wind Waker and your Breath of the Wild? What's your take on them?
Oh, okay. So Twilight Princess was one of my favorite games before Breath of the Wild came out. So I mean, on my list of favorite Zelda games, I know I said Zelda 2 was on the top. What do I say about the other ones? I know Breath of the Wild was second now. Twilight Princess sits third, I think, and Wind Waker sits fourth. Ocarina sits fifth, and I think Link's Awakening sits on number 6.
Wow.
I have no idea. I mean, yeah, I rank things on a top 6. I'm
Fair.
I'm that out there. But but I'm trying to
Six you have
remember.
a strong opinion about. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember because I think I actually answered this question way back when too, when I think you or someone else asked me what my top 5 or top 6 Zelda games were, and I answered it. I'm like trying to remember, is what I just said the same, or did something change between then and now? I don't know.
So it could have. Those things change. They change with time. But what? So you love Twilight then?
Yes,
I remember
adored it.
liking Twilight, not loving it. I remember being fine, but definitely I don't even think it would rank in a top 10 for me if we were to do that ranking. But again, it's been a very long time. I played it upon release, and I haven't touched it since. And I played Skyward upon release as well. And I remember liking Skyward more. So Twilight, I'd love to hear why you love this game so much.
Well, yeah. Again, it's kind of a return to the form. You have Adult Link. You have a much more darker storyline. What I really enjoyed about this was the partner companion in Midna. Midna is a character. I love her. She is great. She's like spunky and sassy and a bit of a snot at times, but then
A little bratty. I would a little bratty and definitely takes no guff from anybody.
exactly, yes, she does not take exactly no guff from nobody. But when you start peeling back the reasons why she is how she is, and you see that trauma that she suffered, her kingdom being overrun by this usurper who is fueled by the powers of Ganondorf, and her struggle behind that. It's you just kind of like feel for her. You just want to like give her a big hug and be like, oh, everything's okay. We'll go kick that guy's butt for you. And I don't know. She's like, to me, she's just kind of a sweet pea, and I adore Twilight Princess because of that. And the ending really got me. I remember like the ending. I felt very emotional that she had to leave and she had to go and she had to tear apart the portals between the Twilight Realm and Hyrule itself. And I remember feeling very sad about that. I was like, oh, no more adventures with Midna.
It's interesting. As you talk about it, it's coming back to me, her attitude and her spunkiness, like you said. I think when I played it of the time, it hit me in a different way. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm really interested. I am not going to play that again. I have 2 more slots in my Zelda playing. It's going to be Wind Waker and Minish Cap. Once I am done with those 2, I am not touching Zelda for a year. I am Zelda out. I've been doing this for 6 months. I'm up to my ears. However, I will say this. I am reminded of that. And you're right. It is very emotional and very touching to see her kind of arc as you continue on this journey with her through the entire journey, really, if memory serves.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Which is fair.
But,
I mean, the wolf gameplay is, it does kind of feel plotting. And that's one of my biggest criticisms of Twilight Princess, despite how much I love it. The beginning section, like the very first, the first introductory section of the game, is slow and plotting, and then you turn into a wolf, and you're not as strong as as like regular Link versus Wolf Link. Like Wolf Link is more utilized for speed rather than for power. So
Sure.
your moveset, of course, is limited to what you can do as a wolf versus like as Link, where you can use all kinds of different items and your sword and your shield and that sort of thing. But so like the first part of the game is really slow, but then as soon as it opens up and you're able to start like traversing the world with your horse and horse sword combat, it's a lot of
cool.
fun.
Yeah. Super cool.
When you get around to that, when you start on that, then that's when the game just starts becoming fun. You're like, oh, there's like all this stuff to explore and all this stuff to see here in the largest at the time version of Hyrule, in a Zelda game. And like, oh, right, this is great. Let's do this.
Let's go. Fantastic.
And then Breath of the Wild comes out, and like whatever you have in Twilight Princess is but a fraction of what exists in Breath of the Wild.
we don't have time to get into Breath of the Wild.
No,
I
we
can
don't.
go on and on and on about Breath of the Wild. expectations were riding high, but once we dove into the game proper, a whole world of gameplay opened up. To talk about some of the nuts and bolts, Coffee returns to talk combat, and Jodi chats about lore and begins building the bridge to part 2 of this episode.
The other thing that I loved about Twilight Princess was the combat. And I feel like the combat system was a natural evolution of what came all the way from Zelda 2. So Zelda 2, of course, is my favorite game, and is my favorite Zelda game. Clarifier. And the reason why I love Zelda 2 is because despite the NES's limitations, you can still engage in some very fun swordplay in that game.
Sure.
And
absolutely. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And while Link to the Past and Link's Awakening kind of returned to that top-down scenario, it didn't really have that swordplay that I enjoyed from Zelda 2. The puzzles, of course, are top-notch, no doubt about it, and you still have that great core Zelda gameplay. But what I really craved was me being able to swing a sword at a bunch of dudes. Ocarina of Time satisfied that to a good degree. Same thing with Wind Waker. Wind Waker, going back to it a little bit there, the combat was greatly improved from Ocarina and Majora's Mask. I think you have a lot more versatility in your moves, in your moveset, depending on how you hold the analog stick. Access to different weapons. Some of them utilitarian, some of them just flat out destructive. But then Twilight Princess introduces you to all these different kind of heroic combat arts. The first one you learn is the classic iconic downstab, as used as a great finisher. Like, yes, the downstab returns in its ultimate form. Because it's not enough to just bounce on a dude's head with a downstab. You gotta finish him off with the downstab. It's just like, it's like done, awesome. Like dinner. It's like great. And then you have all these other moves. You can use like a shield dash to interrupt attacks. You can even just like don't see target anybody, wait for an opening to come in, and then boom, use the equivalent of, and this is me going back into my samurai manga days, because I love samurai manga. This is called a battle jutsu, in a sense where you have the sword sheath, you draw it at lightning speed, and the actual statement is called, I know what it is. This is damn, now I gotta go back and I gotta look it up. I feel so embarrassed. I'm like, why is it not coming to me? But it's a form of sheathing and releasing the blade from the sheath by pressing it down on the bottom of the pressing the blade on the bottom of the sheath and drawing it so fast that you'll instantly be able to cut someone down without them realizing you've been cut down.
Oh, interesting. Without even realizing you've drawn your weapon.
Exactly. Yes. I will find the name. I will put it in the Discord, and because I feel very embarrassed about stumbling over my words right now. I'm like, damn it! Why can't I remember?
It's a microphone. The microphone sometimes dulls the mind. It's okay. You'll remember it the second we hang up this call.
The second I hang it up, I swear.
Yeah. And that's funny because I'm gonna have to look back on it because I don't remember the sword playing being that interesting, but I'm obviously going to take your word for it as someone who's a big fan. And as someone who enjoys lore, how does Twilight Princess's lore stack up to the rest of the series?
Yeah, so I did a lot of research trying to figure out how it connects. It really doesn't much. There is like loose connections, and most of it was fan-made back then. I know technically they've tried to bring it in. Hyrule Historia is just a combination of a whole bunch of fan theories, really, that they printed. But I actually do like it now, and it really shows what kind of stories you can tell. That Link doesn't have to be kids' stories. It doesn't have to be little. It can tell a dark story without being dark and gruesome or anything like that. Like, you don't have to play a horror game to get really adult stories and interesting stories. And it really touched. And the ending, I gotta admit, I had a tear in my eye over the ending of that game.
Yeah,
Just
it's
to
been
see
a
how close
very
it
long
was, right?
time. Yeah, it's been a very long time since I've seen the ending. I'll have to reacclimate myself. I have finished Twilight and I played it of its time, and I remember liking it fine. But I hadn't played a Zelda game at that point since like Ocarina, and at that
Yeah.
point I hadn't even finished Ocarina. So even I was very removed from the series as well. And then from
Yeah.
there, I went from Skyward to Breath of the Wild, etc.
Yeah, right after I did that one, I actually traded my copy of Twilight Princess with a friend of mine for his copy of Skyward Sword. As soon as
There you
Skyward
go.
Sword came out, he beat Skyward Sword, and then he gave it to me the next weekend. I got Twilight back now because I still like it better. But yeah, it's those games go really well together, but they're very different theme wise. But they do go really well together, in my opinion.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd have to like play them again side by side. Again, I was kind of removed from the years, because there was that kind of leap from GameCube to the Wii.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it was
yeah. That one was on GameCube first.
Yes.
I played it on
Correct.
Wii later. So
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I remember playing it on GameCube,
Yeah.
and I remember liking it, but not really catching me as much as others. And as I talk to people, I think I haven't met anybody yet who's like, oh, that's like a top 3 for me.
yeah, it's probably number 4 for me.
If someone was new to the Legend of Zelda series, obviously I think there's ones you'd recommend before it.
Yeah.
But where would you recommend it at all for somebody who says, yeah, I'm really just trying to get into the Zelda series? What do you think about some of the newer ones? Like, again, Twilight and Skyward.
You know what? Twilight might still be out of those. I haven't played Breath of the Wild, which I know maybe that's the one that I would recommend if I played it because I hear excellent things.
Mhm.
But out of like Skyward and Twilight, out of the 3D ones, I'd recommend Wind Waker if they could do it. But I know it's
Sure.
getting harder and harder to play that one.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yeah, it is.
So yeah, probably, yeah, play Twilight. Just take it with a grain of salt, but it's still a good 3D game. It's still a nice adventure. It's got some interesting enemies with those, what is it, the King Bobbin on his horse or whatever that is, a pig.
Yeah. Yep.
But yeah, go with a grain of salt, but I think it's still a good game. And it could still it's still an adventure, which I think is the big thing with all Zelda games. If they've all got to be an adventure, right?
Do you know what else counts as an adventure? Going through the entire Legend of Zelda series in the course of 6 months, that is an adventure. And there is no other group of people I would rather be taking this journey with, starting with Theodore LaBarbera, Games with Coffee, Patrice Millette, the Let's Play Princess, BT Goebbels, Tim Knowles of The Elitist, Julian from Nerds Without Pants, Seth Sergil of the All In Podcast, Dan of Retro Logic, Ryan Payne of Gamers Week Podcast, and the one and only Pete Harney. If you would like to join these wonderful people in supporting the show financially, please go to patreon.com/agamerlooks40. Check out our tiers, and if anything strikes your fancy, sign up today. Twilight Princess was a smash hit, the Wii was a cultural phenomenon, and Zelda was relevant to the new hip gamer crowd. And then this happened at E3 2010.
Zelda. So the Wii Remote, you see with Wii Motion Plus, the Wii Remote becomes my sword, right? And I've got my nunchuck, and that's going to be my shield. Oops.
To put it nicely, it was a disaster.
I can swing.
The demo started with a Nintendo of America executive pretending to play the game terribly.
Hang on, ow! What's going on? What?
Bill, that's not right.
What?
You've got to hold the shield more like a shield.
Wait.
And the sword like this.
Ow! What? No.
And to save the day, Miyamoto appears to teleport from the video screen to on stage in person. But instead of a sword and shield like he held in 2004, Miyamoto held a Wiimote and a nunchuck.
Welcome. You know what? I think I'll explain it myself.
I think that might be a good idea.
Bill, you just take care of English.
Okay,
Okay?
that I can do.
そう。じゃあ、日本語でやります。そうですね。
And despite using the much ballyhooed Wii Motion Plus, everything looked laggy. When Miyamoto held his remote down, Link held his sword up. It took the king of Nintendo several tries to take down a simple Deku Baba. Nothing worked as it should. Every combat movement looked like a chore. The Wiimote kept losing connection, causing the bow to rotate wildly in first person. The pair apologized over and over again for wireless interference that was causing the problems. And instead of pretending to fail at the game, they failed for real. At the end of the day, it was a Wii game. Throughout the 20-minute demo, the audience was mostly silent. And remember, by then, the shine of the Wii was fading fast. We all hated motion controls, and real consoles like the PS3 and Xbox 360 were what the real gamers were playing. The Wii was for old folks' homes and family rooms. That demo became Skyward Sword, and while the reality wasn't as bad as the demo suggested, and critics again showered it with 9s out of 10s, the buzz was gone. Within a few weeks of release, Skyward sales plummeted in Japan. And while the game did pretty well in America, selling 3.53 million units by March of 2012, it was no Twilight. It doesn't rank in the top 10 of Zelda games all time. Phantom Hourglass sold more copies. And while sales doesn't necessarily equate to quality, public perception matched the marginal commercial response. I have never heard a single person claim Skyward Sword is their favorite Zelda game. For most, it doesn't crack the top 10. And I've done nothing but talk about this franchise for 6 months. It's the meh game of the series, the cheery, shiny bridge title between Twilight Princess and Breath of the Wild, and only since its re-release on the Switch are people finally coming around to it, because you can play it on the vastly superior Switch. So why the apathy? Jodi, Coffee, and the great RedAuxPDX join me to talk about the pros and cons of Skyward Sword.
So when Skyward came out, I'll always remember that I used to read a lot of Game Informer, on the later side of my fandom, post EGM, kind of when I got back into gaming, and Game Informer gave it like a 10 out of 10.
Oh wow!
I went,
I never heard
wow,
that.
like you gave it a perfect. So for me, as someone who'd never played it, I'm now extremely hyped. I'm like, oh man, can't wait. And so I get Skyward, I pop it in, and it's good, but it required like Wii Motion Plus, and you have to slash up and down and left and right. And I remember not loving it, and I know now a lot of people don't love it either. Yeah. What was your opinion on Skyward when you first started playing it?
So I had heard some bad reviews actually on like YouTube and that before I played it. Like I said, it was pretty new. Like it was only came out a couple of weeks before I got it. My friend had it though, and he told me, no, ignore the reviews. It's actually a lot of fun. So I'm like, all right. So here you can try with Princess because he had never played it. But Twilight Princess, even with the Wii, you can still use all button controls. You don't have to use motion controls. So I got it, and I beat it in the weekend, actually.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And my wife, that's another one she played with me, and she helped me find all the bugs. She looked up online and gave me hints as to where to find the bugs as we were going.
Nice.
But it was a lot of fun. It was a fun weekend. But the motion controls, well, I don't hate them as much as some people, and especially in some games, I love them. Like, I think Metroid did them excellent. But in this one, trying to hit, especially those, the knights that hold the swords in particular directions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Trying to hit those was so annoying, trying to get my motion to say exactly that direction, exactly that one.
Right.
So it was annoying in those parts. And the Demise is probably the only boss that I actually can just think of remember, because you had to keep going back. So it was so obvious. But it was tedious too because you had to keep going back.
I do remember also with Skyward, it were the characters in the world, and again at the time I hadn't played Wind Waker, so for me the characters in the world were pretty fun. They seemed kind of lively. You had the bully and all that. What was your take on that? As someone who really liked Wind Waker, You can draw some fuzzy lines toward that.
They're probably my favorite part of the game.
Sure.
Was the people. Like going and flying over to that other island that has like the inn type. I love that innkeeper.
I think, yeah.
And the guy down the demon guy that you can slowly change back into a human. He's my favorite character in that entire game. And I know he's just a minor guy, but it was cool. Like that's probably, like I said, my favorite part of that game is interacting, doing the town. Every time I went down to the ground down below, I come back and do some more in the town afterwards and spend a bit of time there. That's what I liked.
That's really, really fun. That's a really good point. And I do remember that. And it actually can be pretty poignant too. And I know some people didn't love flying. I thought flying was super fun. And
it was good. If you don't mind the sailing, I guess it's similar to sailing. Some of it can go slow, and it can be a little tricky at times, though I didn't find it difficult. I really liked flying. I thought that was such an innovative feature, and it really brought back the adventure that was a little lacking in Twilight Princess, where it was so linear.
Yeah, and I definitely thought that exploration was key to it. And again, another kind of interesting tie to Wind Waker, where, like you said, there's all these little pockets and little land masses you can just explore and find. Oh, what's over here? And sometimes you can't do anything there. Okay, I'll come back. All the cool things that you would find in a traditional Zelda map, was there. And and the trickiest thing I bet was probably the combat if you're using Wii Motion Plus, right? Because motion controls are not great for anything other than really easy bowling and tennis. I mean, that's just
anything
we tried.
Yeah, if it swung and it just swung, that means your hand swings the sword, fine. But to try and get actual directions was asking a little too much of the technology, I think.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And it just was never precise. I remember the first time they drop you on an island and you're tasked with fighting, plants, on stalks and stems, right?
Yes.
And of course, the idea is you have to slash laterally to cut them down, just like you would in, again, Wind Waker, right? You swipe sideways and you can cut them in half and cut them on the stem, and then you can do what you got to do. It was so hard to do, and a big indicator that the game designers knew this was going to be hard, but really couldn't do anything about it, is that you start off with 6 hearts as opposed to 3.
Yeah, I never noticed that.
Pretty confident that's the case.
That's probably why, yeah.
And I remember that, because I remember that very vividly, looking like, oh, I have 6 hearts. And they erect really fast because I can't figure out how to make the Wiimote slash, again, horizontally. And I'm like, that's why. Yeah. That's why. And getting really frustrated.
Finally figured it out when I stopped trying to make actually slashing motions and just nick your hand a little bit, like little 1-inch movements. Just
flick it. Yep, flick. Just 1 inch. It can handle 1 inch. You're exactly right. Yeah. And even then, it would still.
You'd still do it wrong sometimes, but that's the only way I'm ever going to get it.
About 10 more minutes, I think, because for a variety of other different reasons. However, I do want to touch on Skyward, because you've recently played Skyward Sword on stream. I think it was last year for the first time.
Yes.
What was your take on Skyward Sword? Did you enjoy it? Did you not? I caught a few of your streams about it, but not enough to get an overall sense. So what was your...
I actually enjoyed Skyward Sword. I thought I wouldn't enjoy it because I heard a lot of not a lot of good things about it. I heard a lot of middling things about it. It's like, oh yeah, it was okay. It's not the greatest Zelda game ever. It's kind of a middle ground. It helps to expand upon the lore of the Legend of Zelda. But as a game itself, it's like, okay, whatever. But I've learned from my own personal experience that whatever people say is mid are games that I actually enjoy, and I will take Sonic Lost World as a big example of that.
Ah, wow, yeah.
Because I love Sonic Lost World, and I found that I liked Skyward Sword just the same. Again, the characters are vibrant, the environment is fun and fresh, the flying mechanics aren't that bad, and so...
I played Skyward upon release, like I said, and I had the Wii Motion Plus, which I think is the one you're required to have for that game.
Yes.
On the Wii. And I
the first thing I remember from that game, of course, was utilizing the Wii Motion Plus to fight. I remember getting dropped into the game and having 6 hearts.
Yes.
And I remember thinking, wow, they've doubled up my hearts. This is really cool. Why would you do that? And then I tried to start fighting things, and I realized exactly why they doubled up the hearts, because they realized, the designers, fighting with the Wii Motion Plus is not the most optimal way of doing this, and you are going to get hit quite a bit. You're going to tank a lot more than you're used to with a Zelda game. And I think that's just hardware limitation. But besides that, I enjoyed my time with Skyward. I thought the last dungeon, the last castle, is annoying. I remember just clinging to a guide for it, like, I just need to get through this dumb thing.
Yeah,
but other than that,
puzzles, right? Where you have to we have to shift around the rooms and everything. To get to, yeah.
Yes,
that was the worst.
That was brutal. But again, it was me not playing Majora yet, not playing Wind Waker yet, playing Twilight, liking it fine. Again, I enjoyed the bright, vibrant world. I enjoyed flying. I thought the flying mechanics were fine. I loved jumping off the bird and landing on different areas. And I thought it was a perfectly fine Zelda game. But again, I hadn't played those biggies. I literally went from Ocarina to, and Ocarina I never owned. So Ocarina at a friend's house that I hadn't really never finished. So I went really from like Ocarina outside knowledge to Twilight to Skyward. And
ooh, that's a big jump.
Exactly. So that was the first, I guess, modern Zelda for me, and I enjoyed it. Now I've played Majora and Wind Waker. I've filled in those gaps. I can totally see how Skyward would be a step back from those lofty mountains, but it's still a fun game. It's still Zelda.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, and that formula is still very satisfying.
Yes. And I feel like the Switch edition of Skyward Sword is the definitive way to play it, because the Joy-Cons feel so much more natural in your hand than the Wiimote. The Wiimote was like much more bulky, versus the Joy-Cons are like slimmer. They handle better ergonomics, I feel. And when I was like, when I was like swinging the sword around, when I was doing those drawing puzzles, I remember there was one stream where I completely flaked on the drawing puzzle, and I still pulled it off. I think I still have a clip on that on Twitch. I think it was like the most brilliant way of me solving a puzzle ever, and I'm like, oh man, I'm so proud of myself.
Look at me! I just did this. I didn't realize.
Yeah, but the way the Switch handled the mechanics of Skyward Sword, it just felt so natural, and it felt fun, and it felt exciting for me. And I'm like, okay, yeah, you know what? I understand why there is a bit of hype around Skyward Sword, and the music behind it. Oh my god!
Yeah, again, Zelda music is always fantastic, and Skyward is no exception. What other Zelda games have you kind of gone through, or any others that you feel like have made an impact?
Well, if I had to pick sort of like my top favorite ones, Link to the Past is number 1, and then controversial choice, here we go. The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword might be either number 2 or number 3 on the list for me. It's very tough because number 2 or number 3 is also Zelda 2, which I first played as an adult. So again, controversial choices, I know. But Skyward Sword I really like because I think for me it achieved what I'd always wanted in a Zelda game, minus the motion controls. We'll talk about that in a minute. But when it comes to story, music, design, when it comes to how the world is laid out, how it unfolds, the way that the story progresses, the emotional connections you make with the characters, and the way that the game kept bringing me back because I wanted to find out what happened on all the different storylines and the side quests, and I was just more invested in that game than I'd been in a Zelda game for a long time. It also has a very satisfying ending, and it has, again, a second quest that if you're interested, you can keep playing and try it on hard mode, so I find it delightful. Now, people's number one complaint, I think, with Skyward Sword was that it was a motion controls game.
Right, yeah.
And so if you're, the tricky part with the motion controls were always the setup. For me, I had to play the game standing. if I was
my
going to
gosh.
do a good job.
Really?
Yep. It really like I was Link walking around and with a sword and fighting. And you have to stand between, I believe, 6 and 8 feet away from the sensor bar. And it has to do, again, body alignment and position also helps with making all the things happen, especially in the boss fights. So, if that's not really for you, I could totally understand it.
Right.
But if you are interested in trying it out and the motion controls are what you're worried about, you can always play the Switch version, where they map the motion controls very nicely to controller. And it's actually pretty easy to make it work. There's only a couple things that I found mapped in a little bit of a weird way. And overall, I thought it was an enjoyable experience. In fact, I made a quick YouTube video that's called The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword is Not as Bad as You Think.
Nice.
And it's the top 5 reasons why it's a fun game that you should play. I think there's only 2 games in that series. I meant to do a bunch more, but you know how it is. You just run out of time. And
Right.
the other one on my list is Bubsy for Super Nintendo.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm interested to see, because I played Skyward Sword when it first came out, and that was like a day one purchase for me, because I like Zelda as well, and I remember liking it fine, and I remember it actually was well received at the time, at least in the magazines I read or the sites I read, and then after a while I hear like, oh, it stinks, it's a terrible game, and I'm like, really? I don't remember it being that bad. Like, the motion controls are a pain, but I got used to it. How does the Switch handle like the diagonal slashes and the stuff that the motion control forces you to do, which is like that 360, but that wider range of slashing motions? I'm just curious how the Switch handles that, because that's part of the game itself.
Right. Thumbstick control, and you basically tap the thumbstick from side to side. So in a way, it still gives you that sword swing feeling, but you're just flinging the thumbstick. The only one that I felt was particularly awkward, and again, after a few minutes practice, I was pretty much able to do it consistently, was one of the moves where you had to do some sort of spin. You had to flick 2 sticks together, and it just was a little bit of practice and getting it, timing and balanced right with your fingers, but mostly it was fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Skyward Sword. Then I recommend people play it. When all that discourse happened, when it first, again, was re-released, I'm like, I don't know. I remember liking it, when I first played it 15 or 10 years ago, whenever it was. So what about my original point? What about the great tug of war between the dark, edgy early aughts and the sunshine-soaked early 2010s? The Lord Reverend D of Rulebooks Anonymous joins me to talk about the stories and legacy of these 2 titles.
I think in terms of like story, Nintendo was rushed when it came to Twilight Princess, because they wanted to have it on the Wii, and this was about the Twilight of the GameCube's time, if you think about it. But like with Majora, there was a lot more polished with the story. They knew exactly what they wanted to do. They had a clear plan. They had this world all created. And then Twilight Princess, it does feel a little rushed in terms of where they wanted to go with the story. Skyward Sword, it seems like they figured out exactly what they wanted to do in terms of story and ran with it. Granted, I'm basing this off of just like a little bit of play, but
sure.
Between the 2, I wouldn't disagree about the whole teenager moody thing. Maybe that was kind of what they were going for. Is like, all right, you played you played Wind Waker before, and now you're like 3 years older, and you're now 13, 14 years old. You're in that moody teenager phase. We'll throw something that you can relate to.
Yeah, and that's always how I felt about it. And I remember playing it again. I finished it. Again, in those days, you have a game, you finish it, right?
Yep.
Even then, I wasn't buying a ton. This is now 2005, so I am a legitimate adult at this point, but still not the kind of like this crazy disposable money just to be buying video games. So I played it, and I remember enjoying it, but it was kind of one of those things where it just definitely felt like one of the lesser titles on for me at least. And hopefully, I'll find some huge Twilight fans, and maybe we'll talk about that a bit more. Of those 2, do you see it that way, first off? And secondly, which do you think you would prefer of the 2? Because they're both flawed, I think. They're actually both very flawed.
I agree with them both being very flawed. I had the GameCube version of Twilight Princess, and honestly, I prefer that one because motion controls don't work for me very well.
Yeah.
But I would agree with that, where they did kind of overcorrect. And I mean, it's okay to go from like a super bright, happy, cheery kind of game to a darker game. It's just you have to manage the tone. You can't go super dark. Everything's going to fall apart kind of dark. You have to kind of ease your way into it, I believe. And then with Skyward Sword, it was a very big difference for me because, again, with motion controls, I struggled with those, and I don't think I got too far into the game before I finally quit.
Interesting. So motion controls obviously were a big part of the Wii experience. I too had Twilight Princess on GameCube, but of course I did play Skyward, and I finished it. I ended up finishing Skyward. I need a little help on the final castle of Skyward, which is just brutal. Oh, it's brutal. I needed to consult a guide, but other than that, I finished it, and I remember liking Skyward better than I liked Twilight Princess, but I'm not sure if it was because of the darker versus lighter. I think I just enjoyed the mechanics and the feel of Skyward a bit better than Twilight. Twilight just felt like a real slog to me. And again, I'm going to touch on it, just refresh myself on it.
Okay.
Of the two, then you said you preferred the Twilight.
I do. I mean, once you learn a little bit more of Midna's story, you understand why she is the way that she is. It's not that she's a brat. She's got legitimate reasons for being the way that she is. And I kind of dug the transformation into the wolf when you get control of it and you're able to do all sorts of different things, because it did add a different aspect to it of, again, this kind of ties in with what we talked about earlier with Link kind of losing his power, because going from human to wolf, there's a big difference in what you're able to do, how people interact with you, and the different places that you can go.
During the research for this episode, I found a 7-minute clip of Shigeru Miyamoto and Eiji Onuma being interviewed about Skyward Sword by Satoru Iwata. During this clip, Onuma had the following to say.
There are a lot of twists and turns during development as we, bring a game together. But we tend to move forward, fueled by sheer momentum, even though we might have some doubts. During all this, we saw the release of Wii Sports Resort, which fully utilized the Wii Motion Plus accessory, and that made a huge impact on the way Wii Motion Plus is used in our game.
Is it because you saw Wii Sports Resort that the new The Legend of Zelda game will only be playable with Wii Motion Plus?
With Wii Motion Plus, you would assume that being able to swing a sword around any way you'd please, would be the way to go. And, we actually tried it. But being able to swing a sword around freely doesn't, really mean...
Being able to swing freely and it being fun are completely different things.
Yes, that's right. But I wasn't able to figure it out. We did it the freeway, but I didn't feel the effectiveness I was expecting. So, we kept working on it. However, the lack of effectiveness made it so that the foundation, on which this high-density gameplay needs to be built wasn't getting done. So before Wii Sports Resort was finished, I told the staff, we shouldn't do this Wii Motion Plus in The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword.
You told them.
For a while, we gave up on the Wii Motion Plus accessory and went ahead without it. But when Wii Sports Resort came out, Eguchi-san, the producer, came up to me and asked me a question. He asked, since he was able to make the swordplay game work in Wii Sports Resort, why wasn't I doing the same thing in The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword?
He asked you bluntly.
Yes.
Very bluntly.
Well, I think so. Since I had already played it, I told him I agreed with him, and then I went to talk to Miyamoto-san about it.
And what kind of position did Miyamoto-san have?
Yeah, I was the one that asked Eguchi to go say that to Mr. Aonuma, so everything was going according to plan.
So you were dancing around on the palm of Miyamoto-san.
I wasn't just making him dance. We had talked about it several times at that point, but coming from me, it wasn't persuasive. I thought we should go deeper into that desire to be able to swing your sword around with your hand freely.
Miyamoto-san, you're always very persistent when it comes to the correlation between physical experience and games.
Yeah. But this is the kind of thing that can only be done on Wii, so I see it as a chance. It's worth the effort.
And I think Miyamoto's final comment really sums up not just Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword, but really Nintendo in general. Nintendo sees opportunities in the bizarre and weird. They're always willing to go for it. And whether or not you love Skyward Sword or whether or not you love Twilight Princess, they are different games. And honestly, they're not for everybody. They're not as universal as an Ocarina or Link to the Past. But boy, are they Nintendo jams. Those games could only be made for the Wii. Those games could only be made for the GameCube. And especially in the world of Skyward, they went for it. For better, for worse, for disconnects, for arm fatigue, or for whatever other reason you can imagine, they thought it would be fun. They put it through its paces, and at the end, even if it didn't work for everybody, it was the Nintendo thing to do. And I think I can say for both Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword, those are games that could only be found in the Legend of Zelda franchise on Nintendo consoles. Because there's not many other companies who'd be daring enough to go the places those games went. Thank you so much for checking out this episode of A Gamer Looks at 40. If you want to continue the Skyward and Twilight Princess conversation, join my Discord. I'd love to have you. We'll spin up a thread and have a good chat about it. Thanks again for checking out the show, and continue being different.